We're ready for our next history lesson for this week. It'll be the last one for this week. We're just going to do 4 a week. That's awesome. So let's look on page 12 in your book. Now we actually have 4 pages to look over today, but that's okay because there's lots of good information in here. It's my favorite time. I love studying about this time of history. It's awesome. Now, why did the Pilgrims and the Puritans come to the New World? Remember? They wanted to worship God the way the Bible said, right? They wanted to worship God the right way. But did all the colonists love and obey God? No. What was that special time called where many people turned to Christ? The Great Awakening. Did you say that? Do you remember that English evangelist that God used to come over and to preach the word, which resulted in the Great Awakening? You remember his name? George Whitefield. Remember him? What was it that led to the Revolutionary War? Do you remember that? What led to that? Remember after the French and Indian War, British people said, come on, pay up, pay for the war. And then they wanted to set laws and not let us have any representation. No, thank you. Those kinds of things led to the war, didn't it? Now, what did the Constitution of the United States, what did that make? What did it form? It made our government. It made the American government. How did George Washington use his power? Did he use it for himself? No, he used it to help our nation. That's exactly right. Look at page 12. Now we're going to read these pages and we're going to find out why the people of the United States must be virtuous. Why we must be virtuous. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have you read pages 12 and 13 silently to yourself. Okay? This is creating a new government. This is talking about when they were writing our Constitution. Now remember in 1776, we had the Declaration of Independence. Remember that was when those men came together and said, okay, we're just going to have to tell them. We sent this nice letter and we asked him to change up the rules, and we were trying to be nice. He wouldn't even look at our letter. He was being rude. So we're just going to declare ourselves free. That's just how it's going to have to be. That's what they did. So I want you then, this is going up to like 1789, I think. And I want you to read this silently, learning about how they set up our government. Okay? When you're done with page 13, you turn this back on. Go ahead and pause. Okay, did you read? All right, let me ask you a couple of questions. Now make sure you answer out loud, just like I could hear you, okay? What must a king be as he rules a country? We already know 2 things. He has to be just, fear of God. He has to be wise. He has to be honorable. He needs to be generous, merciful, loyal, and he needs to be brave. What did the Constitution give Americans power to do? It gave Americans the power to elect their own leaders that would represent them. That's what it gave us the power to do. Now, what made this a time of unbelief? Remember how those leaders, how you read, they started to reject the Bible again. Remember, this is after that first Great Awakening. They started back in their unbelief. And then they'd only pick and choose the parts of the Bible they wanted to believe. What was God's response to this time of unbelief? He didn't send judgment. He was merciful, and he sent a second Great Awakening. How did Americans respond to the gospel during this time? Again, just like the first time, many people came to Christ in that. What did the Christians form in order to do great good in their communities? They formed volunteer societies to help do different things. They would help people in the communities, people, maybe orphans and people who were poor, and maybe they didn't have enough food or whatever. That's what they were doing, which is a good thing. That's what they needed to do. And you turn the page to page 14. Now, this is a different section called the War of 1812. Do you remember seeing this on our timeline at the first part of the chapter? All right. I'm going to read this section to you about the War of 1812. I want you to pay attention as to why another war. We had the French and Indian War, then we had the Revolutionary War, and now a few years later we're having another war. What's up with that? So as I read, I want you to pay attention. Now you've got to follow along and pay attention. What in the world was this war about? The Americans worked hard at setting up a good government. God blessed the United States with many Christian people. At this time, the United States was still a young nation. It didn't have the respect of other countries yet. Great Britain and France were a couple of these countries. Great Britain and France were at war with each other. The United States wanted to trade goods with both of them, but neither Great Britain nor France wanted the United States to trade with the enemy. Both the British and the French stopped American ships from trading with the other country. The British also forced some American sailors to fight for the British Navy. The Americans thought Great Britain was still treating them like a colony. The Americans also said that the British were stirring up trouble with the American Indians. In 1812, America declared war on Great Britain. Neither side was ready for the war. The British were busy fighting the French, and the Americans had only a small military. In America, Congress would not raise taxes to help Americans pay for the war. Without good roads, troops had difficulty moving around the country to fight. The battles that were fought often went badly for the Americans. In the end, the British and the Americans agreed to sign a peace treaty that would end the war. Look at the next page. News of the treaty traveled slowly. One important battle occurred after the treaty had been signed. The soldiers at the Battle of New Orleans had not heard about the peace treaty. The British attacked the city of New Orleans in Louisiana. American General Andrew Jackson had built strong defenses. He defeated the British and became an American war hero. But Jackson didn't always do right. During the war, he had defeated the Creek Indians who fought for the British. But the treaty he made with the Creek Indians afterward was unjust. The treaty took lands away from the Cherokee and the Creek Indians, even though some of these Indians had helped Jackson during the war. President Madison told Jackson that the treaty was illegal. He said Jackson needed to correct the treaty, that the land that Jackson took from the loyal Cherokees and the Creeks had to be returned, but Jackson angrily refused. Since Jackson was a popular war hero, the president backed down. He didn't force Jackson to return the land to the Indians. So that was not right at all. But that's what was happening, is basically Great Britain, they just weren't getting it, that we were a free nation, were they? And they were like, well, you quit trading with the French. And the French were like, you quit trading with the British. And finally, America was like, oh my goodness, we are our own country and we can trade with whomever we choose. So we are going to fight the British because they're still acting like they're our big brother. And we're just going to let them know. So we had this battle that went on up and down the eastern seaboard. It happened even up near Canada. In Canada, there were some battles that took place during the War of 1812. And it didn't talk about it in here, but also during that time, I believe it was in 1814, which was the year the War of 1812 ended. The British came into our American capital and burned all of the buildings. In fact, the reason that the White House is white was because when they burned it, everything inside burned, but the building itself stayed there. And so they just they left the structure and they fixed it inside. And in order to get the black marks from the fire off, they painted over it white. And ever since then, it's been known as the White House. That's an interesting story, isn't it? I learned that not very long ago myself. And a really sad thing is that they signed a peace treaty to end the war. It was over. But back then they didn't have news like we have today. They didn't have cell phones where they could, hey, dude, the war's over. They couldn't just send a text message or whatever. News traveled very slowly in those days. And down in New Orleans, they did not know the war was over. And so we won that battle, but the battle did not have to take place. Lots and lots of men died. I believe it was over 2,000 British soldiers were killed. And they didn't have to be killed, but it happened that way. So that ended up happening with the War of 1812. It lasted for about 2 years, and that was the end of that. So anyway, there's no assignment today either, because I think you've already done your work text pages for this one. So the only thing you need to do is, if you're working on the Pilgrim Village, you can go ahead and work on that today. If not, then you don't have an assignment. Okay? That's all for